"Sir, you don't belong in first class." The words landed harder than any announcement echoing through Terminal C because they were spoken with the kind of certainty that only prejudice ever seemed to carry. Claire Whitmore never lowered her voice. She wanted everyone within earshot to hear it. Travelers slowed their pace. A businessman looked up from his laptop. A young family stopped beside the boarding lane. Even the gate agent scanning boarding passes hesitated for half a second before pretending nothing unusual had happened. Standing only a few feet away, Julian Mercer remained perfectly still. He wore dark jeans, clean white sneakers, and a plain charcoal hoodie with no designer logo, no expensive watch, no entourage, nothing that hinted he controlled billions of dollars in corporate assets. That was intentional. He had learned years ago that appearances often revealed more about other people than they did about him. Claire folded her arms and looked at the boarding pass in her hand as if it were counterfeit. "Seat 2A isn't yours," she said. "Passengers in first class know how this process works." A quiet laugh came from somewhere behind her. Mark Ellis, the lead flight attendant waiting at the aircraft door, exchanged a knowing glance with another crew member before shaking his head. Maybe he wandered into the wrong boarding lane. He muttered just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Julian's expression never changed. His eyes stayed calm, almost curious, as though he were watching a test unfold exactly as expected. Around him, the polished airport floor reflected the bright overhead lights, and the massive windows overlooked a line of aircraft preparing for departure under the late afternoon sun. Everything looked orderly. Everything felt expensive. Yet the atmosphere around Gate B-18 suddenly carried the weight of a courtroom instead of an airport. Claire took one deliberate step closer. "Economy boarding is over there," she said, pointing toward another line without bothering to check the scanner again. "This gate is for premium passengers." Julian finally spoke, his voice steady and controlled. "My boarding pass scanned green." Claire smiled. Without warmth. "Machines make mistakes." Another passenger, an older white man wearing a tailored navy suit, glanced at Julian before turning to Claire. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "Nothing to worry about," Claire replied. "Just someone trying to sit where he doesn't belong." The sentence floated through the waiting area like smoke, impossible to ignore. A young woman standing near the charging station frowned. She had watched the scanner flash green only moments earlier. Her name was Mia Reynolds, a new gate operations trainee on only her third week with the airline. She looked from the scanner to Julian, then back to Claire, uncertainty growing behind her eyes. Something about this situation refused to make sense. Julian reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out his government-issued ID beside the boarding pass. "Both are under my legal name," he said. Claire barely glanced at them before pushing his hand away. "I've already made my decision." Silence settled over the gate. It was the heavy kind that arrives when everyone recognizes something is wrong, but waits for someone else to speak first. Julian slipped the documents back into his pocket with deliberate care. He neither argued nor raised his voice. Instead, he looked through the aircraft window toward the jet bridge, almost as if he were measuring how much longer this moment would last. Claire mistook that silence for surrender. She had no idea she had just denied a seat to the man whose signature appeared on the documents that determined the future of the airline itself. Julian Mercer had not booked that flight because he needed to reach San Francisco before sunset. He could have boarded one of the company's private aircraft waiting less than 2 miles away. Instead, he had chosen an ordinary commercial departure using his real name, his own credit card, and a legitimate first-class ticket purchased through the airline's public website. For nearly 6 months, anonymous complaints had been arriving on the desks of the board of directors. They all sounded different, yet they carried the same uncomfortable theme. Black travelers, Latino families, older passengers, and even military veterans dressed. Casually described being questioned more often, delayed more frequently, or quietly moved aside while other passengers walked straight through. Internal reports insisted everything complied with company policy. Customer satisfaction surveys remained unusually strong. Something did not add up, and Julian trusted first-hand experience more than polished presentations inside a boardroom. That was why he arrived alone wearing clothes that attracted no attention. He wanted the airline to show him its true face before anyone recognized his own. Claire Whitmore looked at another gate agent and gave a small shrug as though the matter had already been settled. "Next passenger," she announced. The boarding line hesitated. Nobody wanted to step around Julian, but nobody wanted to challenge the gate's supervisor either. The delay stretched another few seconds until Mark Ellis walked up from the aircraft door wearing a practiced smile that disappeared the moment he looked at Julian. "Sir, if there is an issue with your reservation, customer service can help you after this flight departs," he said. "Right now, we need to continue boarding our premium guests." Julian calmly answered, "I am one of your premium guests." Mark let out a quiet laugh that sounded more dismissive than amused. "The boarding records say otherwise." Mia Reynolds felt her stomach tighten. She had personally watched the scanner display a successful boarding message only moments earlier. Green Mint approved. There had been no warning, no alert, no duplicate reservation. She looked again at the monitor beside Claire's workstation and noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Seat 2 Alpha no longer displayed a passenger name. Instead, it simply showed unavailable. She blinked once, wondering if the system had refreshed incorrectly. Across the waiting area, two well-dressed travelers approached the priority lane pulling matching leather carry-on bags. Claire greeted them with a warmth completely absent only moments earlier. "Welcome aboard," she said brightly before quietly adding, "We have resolved the seating situation." Julian watched without interrupting as one of the travelers glanced toward him, then toward the aircraft door, accepting the explanation without asking another question. The gate suddenly felt colder despite the afternoon sun pouring through the terminal windows. Conversations became whispers. Rolling suitcases echoed across the polished floor. Somewhere nearby a child laughed, completely unaware that a different kind of lesson was unfolding only a few feet away. Julian slipped his phone from his pocket and looked at the screen for a brief moment before locking it again. He did not place a call. He did not send a message. Not yet. Experience had taught him that truth often revealed itself most clearly when people believed they had already won. Claire Whitmore folded her clipboard against her chest as though the conversation had already ended. "Gate security," she called without raising her voice. "I need assistance with a passenger refusing instructions." The announcement carried across the premium boarding lane with quiet efficiency, and within moments Owen Briggs, a uniformed airport security officer assigned to the gate area, walked over with measured steps. He was not angry. He was simply prepared to believe the employee standing behind the counter before listening to the traveler standing in front of it. "What seems to be the issue?" Owen asked. Claire answered before Julian could speak. "He is attempting to board with a seat that is no longer assigned to him. We have offered alternatives, but he refuses to cooperate." Julian met Owen's eyes without the slightest sign of frustration. "My ticket scanned successfully. My seat disappeared only after your staff decided I did not belong in this cabin." Owen glanced toward Claire. She answered with a confident nod that suggested the matter was routine. "The system updates constantly," she said. "Passengers misunderstand that all the time." Mark Ellis stepped closer from the aircraft doorway and crossed his arms. "We have paying first-class customers waiting to board. We cannot delay departure because someone refuses to accept reality." Those words settled heavily over the boarding area. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. Others continued watching, sensing that something about the exchange felt increasingly wrong. Mia Reynolds remained near the scanner, unable to ignore what she had seen earlier. She quietly opened the boarding display again and refreshed the passenger list. Seat 2 Alpha remained blank, but the activity log beside the reservation caught her attention. A recent manual update had been entered only seconds after Julian's boarding pass scanned successfully. Her heartbeat quickened. System records rarely changed that quickly unless someone with supervisory access made a direct modification. She looked toward Claire, then back to the monitor, trying to convince herself there had to be another explanation. Before she could speak, a distinguished white couple approached carrying matching designer luggage. Claire greeted them with a welcoming smile that seemed completely effortless. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Hawthorne," she said warmly. "Everything is ready for you." The husband looked toward Julian standing quietly beside the lane. "Is there still a delay?" he asked. Claire smiled politely. "Only a minor misunderstanding." She then handed them fresh boarding documents. As the husband glanced down, Julian noticed the seat assignment printed clearly near the top. 2 Alpha. The same seat that had belonged to him less than 5 minutes earlier. Julian said nothing. He simply watched the couple continue toward the aircraft, unaware they had become part of something far larger than an ordinary boarding process. Around the gate, conversations faded into uneasy silence. Owen shifted his weight, uncertain whether this situation deserved the urgency Claire insisted upon. Mia finally took one cautious step forward. "Supervisor," she said quietly, "I think we should verify the reservation history before asking him to leave." Claire turned slowly, her expression sharpening. "Thank you, Mia," she replied with a smile that carried no kindness at all. "I will handle my gate." Mia stopped speaking, but doubt had already taken root. Julian noticed it immediately. For the first time since the confrontation began, someone inside the airline had started looking for facts instead of appearances, and the truth had begun. Moving long before anyone realized it was already on its way. Mia Reynolds knew she should have stayed quiet. She was the newest member of the gate operations team, barely 3 weeks into the job, and everyone had warned her that questioning a supervisor in front of passengers was the fastest way to lose credibility. Yet the reservation log glowing on her monitor refused to leave her mind. She opened the history screen once more, careful not to draw attention. There it was again. Boarding pass accepted at 4:42 p.m. Seat 2 Alpha confirmed. Then, less than 30 seconds later, a manual override removed the passenger assignment. Her eyes widened. Automated systems did not erase premium reservations without recording the employee identification connected to the change. She quietly expanded the audit trail and saw a supervisor authorization linked to Claire Whitmore's terminal. For a moment, the sounds of the terminal seemed to disappear. Rolling luggage, boarding announcements, conversations, all of it faded beneath one impossible question. Why would someone erase a valid passenger after his ticket had already been approved? Mia looked toward Julian. He had not raised his voice once. His posture remained relaxed, his hands resting naturally at his sides, his attention focused entirely on the people making decisions around him instead of the people watching. That calm unsettled her more than anger ever could. Most travelers argued when something valuable was taken from them. Julian simply waited, as though he already understood exactly how the next few minutes would unfold. Across the gate, a woman in her early 60s wearing a light blue blazer quietly stepped away from the boarding lane. She had witnessed nearly the entire exchange while waiting for her own flight. Looking directly at Claire, she asked, "Did his boarding pass actually work?" Claire answered without hesitation, "That information is confidential, ma'am." The woman frowned. "That was not my question." Another passenger, a college student with a backpack slung over one shoulder, spoke before anyone else could. "I saw the scanner flash green too." A young father standing beside his daughter nodded. Slowly, "So did I." The atmosphere changed almost imperceptibly. Only minutes earlier, everyone had remained silent. Now uncertainty was spreading from one traveler to another. Claire sensed it immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced with practiced confidence, "our staff is following company policy. We appreciate your patience." Julian finally turned toward the gathering passengers. His voice remained calm enough that people leaned forward to hear every word. "Policies protect people when they are applied fairly," he said. "They become excuses when they are applied selectively." Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The sentence settled over the boarding area with remarkable weight. Mia took a careful breath before stepping away from her workstation. "Supervisor," she said quietly but clearly enough for Owen to hear. "The reservation history shows the seat belonged to Mr. Mercer after his boarding pass was accepted." Claire's smile disappeared. "Return to your station immediately." Mia remained where she was. "I cannot ignore what the system recorded." Owen shifted his attention from Claire to Mia. For the first time since arriving, doubt crossed his face. Julian noticed the hesitation without showing satisfaction. One witness had become two. Facts were beginning to stand on their own, and once the truth found its first voice, it rarely remained alone for very long. Owen Briggs took one slow step forward, careful to keep his voice even. "Sir, I need you to step away from the boarding lane while we sort this out." Julian looked at him without resentment. "Are you asking because you have evidence?" he replied. "Or because someone told you I do not belong here?" The question lingered between them. Owen had handled countless disagreements during boarding, but this one felt different. Nothing about Julian matched the behavior of someone attempting to deceive anyone. His boarding pass had scanned successfully. He had remained respectful. He had not interrupted a single employee. Yet somehow he was the only person being treated as a problem. Claire folded her arms more tightly. "We have already explained the situation," she insisted. "If he refuses to leave the gate area voluntarily, we will document his noncompliance." Julian nodded once, almost thoughtfully. "Please document everything." Those 4 words unsettled Mia more than any argument could have. They sounded less like a warning and more like an invitation. Nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The woman in the blue blazer quietly opened the notes application on her phone. The young father gently asked his daughter to stand beside him instead of closer to the counter. Even the Hawthorne couple, already standing inside the jet bridge entrance, slowed their pace and looked back toward the gate. Julian's eyes drifted for only a moment toward the wide terminal windows. The afternoon sunlight reflected across the runway, and with it came a memory he had carried for more than 20 years. He was 24 years old, wearing the only suit he owned after saving for months. He had earned enough money to buy a first-class ticket for an important business meeting in Denver. At the gate, an employee had studied him for several uncomfortable seconds before asking whether he had accidentally entered the wrong boarding lane. Other passengers had walked by without showing identification while he was questioned repeatedly about his ticket, his destination, and even whether the credit card belonged to him. He remembered sitting alone after finally reaching his seat, staring out the window, and making himself a promise. If he ever built a company large enough to influence an industry, no customer would ever feel that kind of humiliation because of appearance, clothing, or the color of their skin. That promise became one of the first values written into the corporate culture he later created. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Julian returned his attention to the present with the same calm expression. Claire mistook his silence for defeat once again. "This is your final opportunity to cooperate," she declared confidently. Julian answered softly, "I have been cooperating since I arrived." Mia looked from Julian to the reservation log, still glowing on her monitor. Every recorded action contradicted the explanation being repeated in front of dozens of witnesses. Owen noticed her hesitation and quietly asked, "Is there something I should know?" Mia hesitated only a second before answering. "Yes," she said. "There is far more to this than anyone has been told." The boarding area fell completely silent. The tension no longer came from one passenger refusing to move. It came from the growing realization that the people enforcing the rules might be the very people who had broken them first. Julian slipped his phone from his pocket with the same calm precision he had shown since arriving at the gate. He unlocked the screen, selected a single contact, and waited only one ring before the call connected. "Rachel," he said in a level voice, "activate Meridian Protocol." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Confirmed," Rachel answered. "Level 1 has been initiated. We are preserving all gate camera footage, boarding scanner logs, reservation history, employee terminal activity, and internal communications beginning 30 minutes before your arrival." Julian replied, "Do not notify local management." "Already done," Rachel said. "Only corporate ethics, internal audit, and the executive operations office have been included. Every change made to today's passenger manifest is now locked from further editing." Julian thanked her quietly before ending the call. Claire watched the exchange with obvious amusement. "Calling customer service is not going to change company policy," she said with a confident smile. Julian looked at her calmly. "I did not call customer service." Mark Ellis folded his arms. "Enough delays," he said. "Boarding is almost complete." Claire nodded toward Owen. "Please escort him away from the priority lane so we can close the flight." Owen did not move immediately. Mia's words continued echoing in his mind, along with the reservation history she had quietly described. He looked toward the monitor. "Can someone from information technology verify the audit log?" he asked. Claire answered sharply, "That is unnecessary." Mia took another careful step forward. "Actually, it is exactly what company procedure requires whenever a premium reservation is manually modified after boarding authorization." Claire turned toward her with visible frustration. "You are a trainee. Stop pretending you understand executive procedures." Mia swallowed hard but refused to lower her eyes. "I understand what the system recorded." Around them, more passengers had begun paying attention. A businessman removed his wireless headphones. The woman in the blue blazer quietly started recording audio on her phone instead of speaking. The young father who had been watching from the line whispered to another traveler, "Nobody has shown that this man did anything wrong." Across the jet bridge entrance, The Hawthorne couple remained standing instead of taking their seats. They exchanged uncertain glances after hearing the conversation grow more serious. Claire noticed the growing audience and forced another reassuring smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are resolving a minor operational issue." Julian answered before anyone else could. "No, you are deciding whether the truth matters more than appearances." The sentence settled over the gate like still air before a storm. Nobody laughed. Nobody interrupted. At that exact moment, Rachel called back. Julian answered using speaker mode without changing his expression. "Julian," she said, her voice clear enough for those nearest to hear. "Meridian Protocol confirms that Supervisor Claire Whitmore manually removed your confirmed seat assignment 27 seconds after your boarding pass was accepted. All evidence has been preserved. Executive Operations recommends no further discussion until senior leadership joins the review." Claire's face lost its confidence for the first time that afternoon. Mark looked toward her in confusion. Owen slowly lowered the incident notebook he had been holding. Mia closed her eyes briefly, not because she felt relieved, but because the facts she had feared were now impossible for anyone to erase. The truth had stopped depending on witnesses alone. It was now preserved inside the very systems the airline trusted more than any individual voice. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but inside Gate B18 it felt long enough for every person present to reconsider what they had witnessed. Claire Whitmore stared at Julian as though she were waiting for him to explain away the voice that had just confirmed every detail she had insisted was impossible. Instead, Julian calmly placed his phone back into his pocket. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply stood there with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Mark Ellis cleared his throat. "Who exactly are you?" he asked, the certainty in his voice replaced by something far less comfortable. Julian looked directly at him before answering. "That question should have come before you decided I did not belong here." Nobody spoke. Even the boarding announcements from neighboring gates seemed distant. Claire attempted one final defense. "Anyone can claim to know someone at headquarters," she said. "This changes nothing." Julian nodded slowly. "You are right about one thing. My phone call did not change anything." He paused just long enough for every eye in the terminal to remain fixed on him. It simply revealed what was already true. He took one measured step forward, never crossing the security line, never raising his voice. "You denied my confirmed seat. You reassigned it after my boarding pass was accepted. You ignored your own procedures. And you judged me before you examined a single fact." Claire's expression tightened, but she said nothing. Julian continued, each sentence landing with calm precision. "You believed I was not the kind of passenger who belonged in first class. That assumption became your evidence." Owen slowly lowered his gaze. Mia remained perfectly still, realizing she was watching a moment that would be remembered far beyond a delayed flight. Then Julian spoke the sentence that changed everything. "You denied me a seat on an airline I own." The words hung in the air with remarkable stillness. Claire blinked once, then laughed softly, as though refusing to believe what she had heard. "That is impossible," she whispered. Before anyone else could respond, Julian's phone rang again. He answered immediately and activated the speaker. A composed male voice filled the boarding area. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mercer. This is Daniel Cross, Chairman of the board. Every executive director is currently connected to this call. We have completed identity verification and confirmed your ownership status. The board has authorized immediate executive authority under Meridian Protocol." Nobody moved. Daniel continued. "We also confirm that all evidence collected from Gate B18 has been secured for corporate review. Thank you for remaining on site." Julian answered simply, "Thank you." The call ended. No dramatic music filled the terminal. No applause erupted. There was only silence, the kind that appears when certainty collapses all at once. Claire's shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. Mark stared at Julian without finding another word to say. Owen looked toward the floor before quietly closing his incident notebook. Mia finally released the breath she had been holding since the scanner first flashed green. Around them, passengers who had watched the confrontation exchanged stunned glances. They had expected an argument. Instead, they had witnessed the quiet collapse of an assumption. Julian remained exactly where he had been from the beginning. The only thing that had changed was that everyone else could finally see the truth standing in front of them. Daniel Cross did not call back. He did something far more consequential. Within less than 60 seconds, every executive operations screen across the airline displayed the same alert. Meridian Protocol had escalated from a local review to a company-wide ethics investigation. Flights already in the air continued safely to their destinations, but departures across the domestic network were placed under an immediate operational hold while corporate ethics secured reservation logs, surveillance footage, and employee access records. Inside Gate B18, the overhead departure board suddenly changed. Instead of the expected boarding message, a new status appeared. Delayed. Passengers looked up almost in unison. A murmur spread through the terminal. Mark Ellis reached for his company tablet, only to watch the screen lock automatically before displaying a single notification. Executive access suspended pending review. His expression drained of confidence. Claire hurried back behind the counter and attempted to log into the gate management system. Her password failed. She tried again with shaking hands. Access denied. Contact corporate security. The message remained unchanged no matter how many times she entered her credentials. Owen's radio came alive with a calm voice from airport operations. Gate B18 security officer, remain on location. Corporate investigators are assuming responsibility. No further action is required from airport security. Owen slowly clipped the radio back onto his uniform without saying a word. For the first time that afternoon, nobody was giving instructions to Julian. Every instruction was arriving because of him. Mia's workstation chimed softly. Unlike every other terminal, hers remained active. A secure message appeared across the monitor. Thank you for preserving operational integrity. Please remain available for an interview with corporate ethics. She stared at the screen in disbelief. Only minutes earlier she had worried about losing her job for speaking up. Now the company itself was asking her to help protect its standards. The Hawthorne couple quietly walked back through the jet bridge carrying the boarding documents that had been issued only moments before. The husband approached Julian with visible embarrassment. We did not know that seat belonged to you, he said sincerely. Julian answered with the same calm dignity he had shown from the beginning. This was never about a seat. Around them, passengers slowly nodded. The woman in the blue blazer closed the notes application on her phone and said softly, "It was about how people are treated before anyone knows who they are." Julian met her eyes. Exactly. Across the terminal, airport employees from neighboring gates began noticing the unusual activity as senior operations managers hurried toward B18. Nobody was running. Nobody was shouting. The seriousness of the moment came from something much quieter. Systems were locking. Records were being preserved. Decisions made only minutes earlier could no longer be hidden behind routine explanations or polished customer service language. Claire looked around the gate where she had confidently controlled every conversation only a short time before. Now every screen, every policy, and every procedure she had relied upon was pointing back toward the choices she herself had made. Julian remained standing exactly where the confrontation had begun. He had never demanded special treatment. He had simply allowed the truth enough time to reach the people responsible for protecting it. Senior executives arrived at Gate B18 less than 15 minutes later, not surrounded by cameras or dramatic speeches, but carrying tablets already filled with verified reports. Corporate ethics representatives quietly introduced themselves to Claire Whitmore, Mark Ellis, and the station management team before requesting their company identification badges. No voices were raised. No public humiliation followed. Their access credentials had already been suspended, and every action from that afternoon had been preserved for formal review under company policy. The passengers who had witnessed the confrontation watched in complete silence as accountability unfolded without anger, without revenge, and without confusion. The delay announcement remained on the departure board while operations teams across the airline completed the integrity review that had begun with a single boarding pass. Daniel Cross approached Julian in person and extended his hand. "Thank you for trusting the process," he said. Julian returned the handshake with a calm nod. The process only deserves trust when it protects everyone equally. Those standing nearby heard every word. Mia Reynolds remained a few steps away, uncertain whether she should stay or quietly leave. Julian noticed her immediately. "Mia," he said, inviting her closer. "Today you chose facts over fear. Companies become stronger because of people willing to do that." She looked down for a moment before answering. I only followed what the system showed. Julian smiled gently. No, you followed your integrity when it would have been easier to follow silence. Owen Briggs removed his cap respectfully before speaking. I should have asked more questions before making assumptions. Julian answered without hesitation. The willingness to question yourself is how professionalism grows. Even the Hawthorne couple approached once more before boarding resumed. We are sorry we accepted that seat without asking what happened, the husband admitted. Julian shook his head kindly. The responsibility never belonged to the passengers. It belonged to the people trusted to treat every traveler with fairness. Around the terminal, conversations slowly returned, but they carried a different tone now. People were no longer discussing a delayed departure. They were talking about dignity, responsibility, and the quiet courage of speaking when something felt wrong. Before leaving the gate, Julian looked once more across the polished floor where the entire incident had begun. Nothing about the building had changed. The same boarding lane stood in place. The same aircraft waited outside the window. The same departure screens glowed above the terminal. The difference was not the airport. The difference was that one assumption had been challenged, documented, and refused to survive another day. As boarding preparations quietly resumed under new supervision, Julian picked up the carry-on bag that had remained beside him throughout the entire afternoon. He had never demanded special privileges. He had only expected the same respect every paying traveler deserved. Before stepping toward the aircraft, he turned back one final time and spoke with the calm certainty that had carried him through every moment since arriving at the gate. I did not raise my voice today, he said. I raised the standard. A first-class seat can be reassigned. A flight can be delayed. Even an entire airline can pause to correct its course. But a person's dignity is never an upgrade to be earned. It is the starting point for every journey. And with those words, the gate became quiet once